Hi, everybody. So, Mia and I are here together today, and we're going to talk about the layers of civilization because we had a big conversation in Malibu, right?
Yes.
And it was
Mhm.
really beautiful. So, we're going to talk about that and kind of bring some of that conversation into this conversation. So,
Thanks for
should be
having me,
fun.
honey. And
Thanks for being here.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
excited to talk
It
about
was
all this.
such a
Um,
whirlwind of a trip. Yeah.
so much so fast. It's always like that around events. I feel like it's like so much preparation and energy, and then it always goes too fast. But it was
Mhm.
so fun to have you and Aaron out to do that, and it was so potent just to be there. And I know if you haven't been to Malibu, it might sound like it's different than it is in actuality. There's a lot of land there that's farmland. We are on a beautiful biodynamic farm. It's there's a lot of life there that's very close to the earth, and there's really all these amazing formations. The mountains there, and they're not huge mountains, but they're pretty dramatic. And I lived in the mountains there for years, and they're really mystical and beautiful. And I always noted all of the formations and the strange stuff in the stones there. Um, the
Yeah.
entire time I lived there. And then this time, especially, it's so green there right now, and it felt like it really that changes the landscape too. So I kind of saw it all with new eyes this time too, just
Mhm.
all the formations and
Yeah, it was a trip. And it was really interesting how we were so close to it actually. And
yeah,
we could see,
yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
so
So we talked about obviously we talked about like hidden history and all the things, so many fun things in that video, which we can share the link for if you guys want to listen to it. But we get there and we start talking, and then honey, you're like, "Oh my gosh, look, there's a Titan right behind us." So even just from the point of view we were sitting, um there were these formations in the mountains right behind us, and I think you have a photo. We have a couple photos of that too to
I
share.
do, which I'm gonna find, which is so complicated to find. Okay, so I found it. All right.
And so
So
like what I wonder too, you could maybe share what you get on this too, honey, is so all of these formations, faces and different beings or things in the mountains there. And then also there's known to be kind of a strange underwater military. Is it a military base? Is it a ET base? There's stuff out in the water underneath too. And it's interesting that it's in this area. And so
I
I was
think
curious about that.
it's military or was military, but maybe more negative than positive
Hmm. It seems like
military. Yeah.
defunct now. Feel so that would make sense. Yeah.
Mhm. So this is where we were facing. So we were kind of facing the parking lot, the three of us. And this is a face right here where my mouse is. And I blew it up. So hopefully I can, the computer's being kind of weird right now. Okay, so here is the face. So you can see the brow and the nose and then the lips and then the chin. And it was such a trip because it was just like so obvious immediately. And I think it was Aaron and I that noticed it at the same time. So such a trip that we were there and talking, and right behind us was a Titan.
Yeah, that's so wild.
Yeah,
Yeah, so perfect for that talk. How divinely aligned that we were right in front of that. I mean, that's so wild. Yeah.
it was amazing. So I feel like we're really like noticing now too. So on our drive, you and I, because I took you to Oregon, there was another amazing thing, which I think I shared on Telegram too. But you took this picture. and it's a tree.
Giant
So
tree step. I love that.
isn't it beautiful? And it's so obviously a tree.
I know you can't really unsee it once you see it. I mean, it's amazing to start to learn all this stuff. And then the first, big trip you go on, you're like, oh my gosh, and you're seeing everything everywhere. And it's funny because after this trip too, I talked to a friend of mine, shout out to Maria. Hi, Maria, who's very aware of all this stuff too. And she was like, oh my gosh, that stretch of highway, there's like so much going on. And she was saying that she noticed the same thing, the trees and then pyramids and just a lot
Mhm.
going on.
So many pyramids. And when I got back, I was looking at the mountains here, and I never had looked at them in that way before. But I could see that a lot of these mountains are actually pyramids. And they have kind of a weird, like, star fort formation that comes down from them. That's like this buildup. So I'm going to see if I can find the
That
star forts.
That would make sense. Yeah, I wonder how many star forts versus pyramids and what the difference is. Because, if you think about it, there are so many star forts all over the world. And in Europe, a lot of them haven't been destroyed. Or even if you think of the East Coast, I lived in New York City for 7 years, and there are so many trippy things along the waterways there. There are man-made islands and star forts, and even the Statue of Liberty is a star fort. So you can see it a ton on the East Coast, but it's like, well, if they were everywhere, then there must have just been hidden on the West Coast, right?
Totally everywhere. And I feel like the Titans, they had their own civilization and um, they didn't have a veil. I don't think they had a veil. So they had knowledge that we haven't had, actually.
Right.
So, but these berms here that, obviously here they're quite sharp at the top, but there's tons of these that come down from the mountains that are more rounded. So it's totally
Right.
trippy.
There's a star fort that I found recently. It's kind of amazing synchronicity. I was on a plane to the mainland from the island and picked up like like the magazine that they make or what.
Oh, I don't know where Mia went.
So I thought that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, very amazing. We did lose what you said though. I feel like the internet actually went out on us.
That's so funny. I was just talking about how Starlink is so great, and now it's weird for the first time. I was just saying how it was synchronistic too. On one of the last flights I took to the mainland from the island, I picked up the Hawaiian Airlines magazine, and they were featuring a star fort, and I was kind of blown away
Oh,
that they were featuring a star fort.
that's so cool.
Um, So that's cool. So even yeah, here as well. Can you share, honey? Because I don't even think I know this or if I've heard you talk about it, but like as far as like the Titans, like kind of when I know, kind of time is all happening at the same time, but if we had a time like when they were and also sort of what that civilization looked like, since we're talking about these things in all these different areas, like were they the ones who created the pyramids and the star forts, or was it different and they inherited some of that or and repurposed it, or how, like, what did that look like?
So the Titans came first as far as beings go. They were the first beings that were created that were physical. Um, so I mean that's like at the very beginning of time, really. So they
Yeah.
came before the ETs. They came before pretty much
Oh,
everything, and they remind me of Scottish, like wild men wearing kilts. So whenever I think of Titans, that image comes in to me. And they were pretty raucous, pretty intense with each other. Um, Lots of partying, lots of fighting, just wild. But they didn't really mean anything in a bad way either. They were just kind of being themselves. And since they were the first being that existed too, I think not everything had necessarily been thought of. So the first soul group was called the architects, but they didn't have bodies. So they were
Mm.
souls, and they were creating with source, with God, um, and creating math and creating all these things, but they they didn't have bodies. So the Titans were the first beings with bodies.
And was it just on like this planet, or were they in
No,
different planets too?
they were on other planets too. That's what comes in
Oh,
immediately. Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yep.
Wow.
So, and they were wild, and it took a while for them to kind of grow up. But at this point, they've ascended, and you know, but I
They're
think
not
they
evolved.
created the huge things. So, like the enormous
Right.
pyramids stuff. They knew about levitation. So, another question that somebody asked was, how were the pyramids created? And
Mhm.
it's like, well, levitation. They knew about sound and frequency. So,
I love that. Yeah, I've always been obsessed with sound and frequency, knowing that there's more to it. But I love I don't know if you guys heard there's stories of, explorers going to certain deep places and where the natives of that population were still using frequency to move stones and do things like that.
mhm.
And I'm sure this is becoming such a kind of more of a known thing now, but just looking at like those stones in Peru, how they look like you took like these marshmallows and squished them together, like there's no other way to me that that could be done then unless you change the molecular structure through frequency to do that
Yeah,
because there's no gaps. So, I mean, and that's another thing. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. You're looking around and you're like, oh yeah, this had to have been done another way. It makes no sense what they tell us, the narrative
yeah,
with
it
that stuff.
doesn't. It makes no sense at all. So, and there was some guy, I think you're probably referring to the same person who he created a record somehow, or he wrote it down. I
Yes.
don't remember. Yeah. And it was monks that were doing it. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
he was a news person
That's
and he
right.
took it back to them and then they destroyed it.
That's what it is. Yeah, they destroy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's happened like so many times. I love because I've always been I want to talk more about the giants and stuff like that too because there's different kinds of giants and I've always been fascinated with this and so I've
Mhm.
always sought out this sort of evidence and it's now coming out again but like even over the last 20 years it's interesting how things would come out and then get hidden because I grew up for part of my life in California and going to Catalina Island and then I found out that the Wrigley Mansion, which probably wasn't always the Wrigley Mansion, of course, it would looks like Territarian architecture. They used to have a Giant's Bones museum, and it was like a thing, like a novelty thing for years. You could go to that
Mhm.
museum and see all of the evidence of the giants, and then, um, I don't know, probably the Smithsonian, what honey, right? Like that's who keeps seems to
Oh
keep
yeah.
coming in and taking things away to protect it, and then it just disappears. Um, but even like that was, I think, around the turn of the century, maybe early 1900s, that was still going, that museum.
Yeah. Well, and then a lot of the bones, you can't really tell what that looks like. So a lot of these
Yeah,
bones are mostly dragon bones or just very large animals that maybe we see in a smaller form right now, um, which we call dinosaur.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
do get
So,
that there were some dinosaurs, but I never get that there were the plethora of dinosaurs that they talk about.
I mean, that would make sense because there are those paintings from, there's supposed like Renaissance paintings, which was there a Renaissance? What we don't really know I feel like I don't know what these periods were anymore because we've been lied to so much. But anyway, they're seen as Renaissance paintings where there are showing processions of like people with some of them are riding dinosaur looking beings. So
Yeah.
that seems to be evidence that those ones maybe existed at least. But
maybe
Yeah,
they're an ancient relative of the giraffe, like we don't
right.
really know. And there were dinosaurs that pterodactyls, the flying dinosaur, that there were pictures with people, you know, that
Oh
shot them
yeah.
down. So that had to have been right around the early
Yeah.
1900s. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories and news articles about like that kind of stuff too. I remember because I growing up listening to Coast AM, if anybody else did, which was amazing. I loved that show growing up in the 90s,
Yeah.
and they would talk about a lot of those kinds of accounts of like the cryptoid accounts, and yet people would talk about seeing like like pterodactyl things. Even then, really, really big flying
Yeah.
dinosaur bird type things.
Huge things. Yeah. So, and we see there's some today that are quite big, but if you think about it, giants existed, titans existed, Nephilim existed. So you have these huge beings that are gradually getting smaller and smaller. So where are they the smallest? Probably where we've been living,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, so Can can you share a little more about that? So is that kind of what happened? Like, so if we have the Titans and they're huge, right? They're like mountain size essentially.
Yeah.
Um, and they seem to have died. I mean, did they die in a sort of an extinction type of event or like a something that turned them to
Kind
stone,
of. I
or
feel
was
like it was a war that they were there was more than one thing going on at a time. So there was a event where they were pulled away from Saturn. Like Earth was pulled from Saturn. Um, and I feel like that point they might have died out completely. But I feel like there was another event too where they were at war. So I feel like that's when the trees got cut down.
okay. Yeah, so the giant trees get cut down, but then they've already sort of had offspring somehow because as far as I understand, there's yes, the different kinds of are they different kinds of giants, or is it just like as the lineage moved through time, they like got smaller? Do you know what I mean? Because there are stories of giants that were
Both.
kind of people will call the redheaded ones that were, and some of them seem to have been like harmonious, living amongst people and being friendly. And then there are the ones that are the stories that they actually ate people and they would be kind of exiled. So the not people say like the not
Yeah.
good giants and are they're all the same lineage or like how does that what's that history like look like?
Well, they are and they aren't. Like, I think that they were genetic experiments. And I feel like a lot of them came from Atlantean time, and it had to do with the Nephilim, which to me is the Anunnaki. So the Anunnaki and the Nephilim are the same being. And they were doing their own experiments on their own bodies because they also realized that we didn't have quite as much oxygen. So the oxygen wasn't as plentiful here. So it was hard for the really large beings to like kind of make it here as well, to live as long. So,
I
and
see. So
if
they're
you're in
like
a more,
genetically modifying themselves.
yeah, and they were
Okay.
genetic, so they have all these rumors that, the fallen angels, which were supposed to be the Nephilim, came down and mated with human women. And when I heard that, I was like, no, that's not going to work. So what did they actually do? They actually did genetic modification of themselves with humans. And the ones that were really not nice, the ones that were totally and Redhead ran in the Anunnaki line, the red hair, but
Hmm.
the ones that were really mean, I feel like they were genetically modifying them without adding in the
Mm.
human gene. So there was
Mm.
something, it was causing them to be mean. And they were in the Grand Canyon and
Okay.
I think in Israel or Iran or Iraq or someplace. Yeah, as well.
Yeah, around I remember that story and there are giant's bones I know people that have found them on the East Coast, like in the Pennsylvania area. And then I saw a really interesting old map that said this is the land of the giants or something, kind of in the, like if you're looking north of the United States-ish, almost like up into Canada on the west side. It was like, yeah, it said something about like this is where the kind of like we don't go there, it's the land of the giants or something like that. I forget, it's in Latin, but it's pretty interesting. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So just to think of a time when it's like that, that we're okay, we're declaring like, what's going on. It's so interesting. Okay, this is the Giants
Yeah. And I
zone.
would, do your own research on all that stuff, but also like look into the Grand Canyon and the news articles that came out where the Native Americans went after the red-headed giants and
Yeah.
basically burned them up in their cave because they were attacking the Native Americans. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah,
lot of
it's so
stuff
wild.
out
And
there.
I was like I told, Penny before we jumped on, there are elders in the community here in the islands that will talk openly about that. They're like, well, we weren't the first here because, of course, that they're thought of indigenous to the area, and they are, but they're like the redheaded ones were here before, and a lot of times it's not really socially acceptable to talk about that because it's not in alignment kind of with the narrative and the history, and you could get into that, but essentially they'll say privately that if you talk to them that, oh, everybody knows that. The elders all know that. And so yeah, it's so interesting. And I wonder if I don't know, I'm just curious about this area. I wonder if it was the kind of the good ones or the naughty ones. um
Mostly good, I'm getting. They were
okay.
pretty nice, actually. And they came after Lemuria,
Mm,
I feel like. And then also in New Zealand, the same thing happened. So they
yeah.
may have some Lemurian blood as well. They may have. That's kind of what it
Yeah,
feels like.
there's that's really really interesting. I just wanted to say there's a really great documentary. I will try to find it so I can share it, the link, but about the Maori and the New Zealand and the elders openly talking about this, actually talking about the redheaded ones and how they feel that was part of their story based because some of the Maori have red hair and they're proud of that and they love that part of their lineage. And so it's a documentary all about that and how it's been erased. It's really good. Try to find it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. It just started raining here and being crazy outside. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, I'm like, okay. So I'm gonna
Energy
look
shift.
for some cathedrals because you sent me, yeah, so this is beautiful.
Um, so yeah, the cathedrals are really interesting because I lived in England when I was 13 for a year. My father did a sabbatical and he did research at the University of York and also at the Minster, which is supposedly, I think it's like the biggest medieval cathedral still standing in Western Europe and in York. And
Mhm.
I just can remember being there when I was young, and it didn't feel like a place to gather. It felt like something else because the way it was set up, it wasn't like a cozy gathering space. It felt like now I'm like, oh, I think it felt like a battery. And it felt weird to be in there because there weren't, in the churches that are built today, it's like they're built for like people to hang out, but it felt very different. Um,
Yeah, I think they
yeah.
were. They were like mini pyramids of the time. Um, and it was I feel like they were almost like 3D printed,
That's
like
what it feels like.
carved. Yeah.
Because it's so
So,
intricate and it's like a lot of those sculptures of that era too, because I studied art history that feel like they're so real down to the fabric and like the veins on people's arms. I mean, it's wild the accuracy, and I have never seen an artist replicate anything remotely like that today.
uh-uh.
Um, they're
No.
more. Well, yeah.
Yeah, so there's just so many things for you guys to look at that I would, start looking around if you're really interested in this stuff.
Do,
This is another one that you shared, Mia,
do
which I
you,
think is
honey,
really cool. Huh?
I was gonna ask you, yeah, do you get that? So if these were like, because I think it makes sense that there were sort of batteries, like you're saying, because if you look down on them and then you look at a battery, it's like you can see the different areas. It totally makes sense. And then all the cities were in these sort of grid patterns where you could kind of see like, oh, this is an energy center and it's being carried out through the city, through the city, right?
Hmm.
And then there were the organs in there, and then those windows that are like sacred geometry shapes, which are basically like a cymatic. So it's like the sound, it's like the visual of a frequency.
Yeah.
And someone asked me this yesterday, which I was like, I don't know, but so I thought I'd bring it up. They were like, well, were people laying in there for sound healing? And I almost feel like it wasn't like it was coming out, but do you think people are actually going there, or more like it was pumping it out into the town so they didn't have to actually physically go be in there, or both?
I think it depended on what you needed.
Okay.
Yeah, because there were the bells too. Hopefully that's not
Yeah.
too loud for you guys. There were the bells also that they got rid of that had different frequencies, and
Mhm.
that was really important too. Um, but I want to share this. So this applies to the battery because this is what is on top of or was on top of most of them.
Mhm.
And look into electroculture and, think about Tesla and see how this feels to you, because
I,
there's so much
yeah, I
out
think
there.
that I just saw a whole thing about like Ethiopian churches and that culture, and it's like the same thing. It's like really,
Mhm.
really intricate. There's a word for it too. There's a certain kind of geometry that it's like using, but I don't remember. But they look like this and even beyond. Um, Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, and the real math is different than what we've been practicing. So I'm really excited to start seeing and learning more about that. But I think that not necessarily Terrence Howard, he didn't come up with it, but the things that he's talking about, I can't remember the name of the
Uh,
scientist.
Walter
Um,
Russell.
yeah. So look into Walter Russell's work if you're really curious. And you can also look into, Terrence Howard, but he's building on Walter Russell. And it's,
And
yeah.
it's so me. I also really love because I finally like I could feel that there was a lot of truth in that without listening to it, just hearing little clips.
Hmm.
I was like, oh wow, this is huge that this is becoming mainstream. But then I finally listened to maybe the first half. It's really long. And as I was falling asleep, and I love that he also really outed that he basically told us how people are accessing this information. He did credit Walter Russell, but he also was like, well, I got the information from my dream. And he even said it was himself. He really later realized it was his more advanced part of himself, his higher self, coming to him in the dream, taking him into a mansion and giving him all the access to this info. So it was really cool that he shared that along with it, I thought too.
Yeah. Which is another for like that's the way Tesla got a lot of his information too,
Yeah. Yeah.
which that's how we're now getting our information. Just the general public is getting their information. They're starting to tap into their higher self. So
Yeah. And it's so cool because I
cool
mean
stuff.
that's the whole thing about like the programming of the religion was to take us away from that we can have the revelations ourselves and we can tune in. It's always like a mediator. And as that goes away, we're getting more tuned tap back into ourselves. And it's so cool because I just think of like growing up, I grew up in a very Christian family. So I know what the difference feels like because when you're young and you're in that, it's sort of like, oh, there are these special people that had these revelations or these messages. There's this connection to God, but that's not normal. That's like not you, you know? It was very, very,
Yeah.
very outside. And then to go through my own life and like, you know, what, honey, the way you work and like what he's talking about, yeah, as far as like having that personal revelation, I mean, it's really, really, really different. And it was so, it was so almost like heretical to even suggest before that you could have that yourself. So it's just such a big shift, I think, you know, for the average person who will hear that and start to be like, oh, wow, well, that's, you know, that's very interesting. That's very different.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The wind has gotten crazy, but hopefully you're not
The wind
hearing
picked
it.
up here too, actually. I
Ah,
and it wasn't
yeah,
windy at all. So that's
moving
interesting.
energy.
Woo.
So here's another one that you sent me, which is fantastic. And here's the cymatic symbol in the middle. But yeah, these are so intricate. All this stuff is so intricate, and it can't be duplicated today with our modern stuff. So we all must have some clue. I mean, I always was shocked by this stuff. I was like, how do they create that? That doesn't make sense. But
It's
the more that we
wild.
know, yeah,
It's wild. And also some of those doors are so huge. They and I especially always love showing the door. I don't have this picture easily.
oh, it looks like my internet is being
But
bothered.
people will try to discount it, but then the handle is up really high too. So it's like, okay, so a normal person made the door big, but they put the handle up there? Like, no, right? I don't know if
Yeah,
I got
it's
lost, but
crazy. You got lost for just a second. I feel like so I just got Starlink, so the internet's been way better. But the wind is blowing like crazy right now, and I don't know if it's going like this out there. I don't know what it's doing. So
well, it's weird because I was just saying, yeah, my internet's been great, but now it's being weird today too. And there's just a huge military something that flew over. We aren't in a flight. I'm very remote and no flight path. There was just a really loud military um something that just flew by too. So a lot of
yeah, we had that too today. One plane really low, super low. So did you send me a portal?
yes, there was one of the oh yeah, I would love to just look at that. It's the stones. It's a stone circle that's in Scotland. I think it's a quite
Okay.
well-known one, but I'm forgetting the name right now. Maybe I
Oh,
can
I found it. Okay,
find
good.
it. But yeah, so if you guys, I mean, obviously this is you know, the ley lines and all these kind of structures, and you probably know about them, but I really did love the show Outlander for lots of reasons, but I loved that it highlighted these kinds of portals basically, and it made me really think about it too. And in in the show, the way they travel through the stones is they have to have a gemstone on them. And I wondered if like is that true, honey? Is there something like are there sort of like rules or energetics for moving through them?
Yeah, it feels like the jump stone is a stone from the other realm that they're trying to get to.
Mm, okay.
Yeah, because it doesn't feel like the portal just takes you anywhere. It just takes you to one place.
Okay.
And the show that we watched, Outer Range, that was also a portal, but it was a different kind of portal. This one feels like it's a created portal to go between times.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
Um,
crazy.
do you think they move around usually? Or like are any of them stationary or do they all kind of move around?
Yeah, they move around because the timelines shift, but they don't necessarily move tremendously. The thing that the timelines and the multiverse and all that kind of stuff, like things can happen anywhere. Until we really understand the math completely, I don't think we'll totally understand this, which is why I I'm personally am going to wait to go through a portal until it's kind of understood a little bit better because you don't know where you could end up at this point. Um, but it's amazing to me. So, and I do feel like, and there was another show about it too with these kids, and he had something too, I feel like, and he went right through and he opened a portal, he went right through and he took all of his friends and they were in front of these grown-ups. They just disappeared.
Wow.
So it is a possibility like that this could actually, I think it has happened with certain people, that they have disappeared at least. And I think there's
Yeah.
some in those national parks. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, there must be I mean, there's got to be around,
Yeah.
and it definitely makes you wonder if it's some of the areas because there's so many off areas we're not allowed to go in, now I'm aware of it. Now I'm like, oh, that's another restriction zone. And they'll use every kind of different thing for the restriction zone. It's a national park or it's a bird sanctuary or the whole island is a this or that. And you're like, that seems weird. Now I question it. I'm like, is that a bird sanctuary, that whole island? They've like made a lot of things, no fly zones. Yeah, now it's like, oh, what are they
No
hiding?
fly zones, especially, are very sketchy to me. That whole idea of not being able to fly over it, that who knows what's there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of extinct animals that are now showing up again. And I think that's because they weren't necessarily extinct in other places and they're not being restricted anymore.
I mean,
So,
I also just heard somebody give a really funny but kind of little talk about also they could use I mean, how much did the system use the notion of the going extinct animal also to just like prey on people's emotions and just siphon money out of them too, you know what I mean? It was such a
oh yeah.
huge cash cow for them to be like, okay, let's worry about the spotted owl now or the this or the that. And someone was saying that they're like, oh, my mother probably gave millions to NPR for these animals. And then, he's like, now, the buffaloes are disappearing, but now we're eating buffalo meat. So obviously they figured that one out. You know what I mean? Kind of just that's just a whole other weird dynamic they created too.
Yeah. It's a tell them this and then they'll do this, thing.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like people are interested in falling for stuff anymore. Like it's very rare that people are falling for things. It seems like, especially in this group that we're in, with audience, like people just are not falling for much of anything. So it's been
No,
really
and
good, you guys. I'm so
no, it's
proud of the
good. And
audience and all of us. Yeah.
so much more so much is coming
Hmm.
out now that we knew and had talked about, and now it's coming out in the mainstream too. So not that
Yeah,
it feels great to, you don't, just feels good that it's becoming clear for people now, even if
it
it's
really is. Yeah.
intense.
And looking around, like if you just go outside and you look around in nature, you're going to see things now that you didn't see before. You didn't even notice. And
Can I ask?
yeah,
Yes, can I ask you about? So this happens too. I mean, I think once you really open your eyes and you start to see these things, and your frequency is shifting, it's like it's kind of just amazing going anywhere new because you're kind of just like you're saying you're open to it now. So when we were on the mainland, when I was on the mainland, and Honey dropped me off in Oregon, and then I was with my friend Paula, and she took me to these really beautiful hot springs, Cougar Hot Springs, forget the other name for them. And then we went to some waterfalls in that area. And there was one waterfall we went to the top of, and I was just sitting and I felt it was so trippy. I felt like totally almost like enchanted by it. Like I was kind of leaning over into it and it's huge and I'm at the top and the water's going over. So there's a massive amount of like energy moving. And I kept getting like sucked into like mentally, emotionally to the waters there. And I was just imagining, I mean, it sounds kind of dark, so I'm gonna preface that, but it was almost like like inviting me to like jump in and like go over the falls. And so I kind of had this whole experience in my mind of that. And I was like, that's so weird. Like obviously I'm not gonna do that and I don't want to do that, but I went with it. And then just kind of like when I walked away, I was like, that was very strange. Like what was that? Was that a portal or an echo of like the past? I don't know. And then we get into the car and my friend's like, what did you think of that spot? And I was like, oh, it's so weird. And I told her the experience. And she's like, just got chills. She's like, I had the exact experience when I went the last time. And I almost told you about it in the car, but I didn't want to color your experience. And she said that I'm the only one who like said this same thing back to her. And we were just like, okay, so that's definitely something. It's very interesting. So
Yeah.
I'm what you get what that was, honey. Was it like an echo of
Mind
some
control layer.
wow.
Yeah. It was an echo of it. Yep. Old stuff. And I feel like a lot of layers, like every time we go through a big collective shadow or we shift a little bit, we break open cracks to past stuff and old parallels, and we then have to clean it up. So it doesn't always feel great. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that is it sounds dark. It didn't feel bad. It was just like it was like watching a movie of like something like, what's that movie? You know, it's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it didn't have enough strength to do anything to you, but in the past, I feel like it did.
It did.
Like,
Wow.
yeah, to other people.
Yeah, that's so heavy. Yeah. So, yeah, we should clear that space maybe.
Yeah, that would be good. So, but I just want to remind everybody about the recording, and we really had a great time, and there were a lot of people asking questions, and we were freezing. So we really did our absolute best while we were cold to answer and keep answering questions. And it was a very long and beautiful exchange with the audience. So there was a lot of questions in there that I think people would appreciate, listening to. And the
Totally.
recording will be right below.
Yeah,
I had
totally. Yeah.
fun,
It
even
was
though I was
so
cold.
it was so fun. I know, you guys, that's the thing. It's like people are like, were you in California? Yeah, Malibu in this, in the spring, summer in the 70s feels very cold. It can feel very cold. I don't think the audience was as cold as us, but we were getting kind of the wind up there, and yeah, we were
Yeah.
freezing.
Yeah. It was really interesting. And I think because it's so moist too, it
Mhm.
makes you colder.
Right by
Just
the
like
ocean.
San Francisco, there's like a song about that or something.
Oh, totally. No, I've never experienced like what is it, like a colder winter than a summer in San Francisco. And I lived there for a time, and it's true. It's that like air, that ocean air and breeze. It's like bone chilling in this way, but it will be the most beautiful day. I remember wearing lots of layers there when I lived there. Yeah,
Yeah.
same kind
Oh, it's such a gorgeous day though, too. And it's so green. So green there. And the owner of the property was just so much fun. So
yes,
it was
just
a
little
great get together.
shout out to that. Like yes, just yeah, to Carrie of Malibu Fig Ranch, because if you are in Malibu, go see her. She's amazing. She's an expansive human. She's really tuned in, and she's growing like the most high vibe, biodynamic fruits and vegetables. And she also sources really high vibe stuff for chefs too. She grows her own and then sources. And so she's just an amazing human to support. And I was very blessed that she hosted us. Yeah.
Yeah. The watermelon was like unbelievable. Yeah,
Oh,
that we had. So
so
good.
so amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So good.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mia. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, honey. It was
Thank
super fun.
you.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks everybody for watching. Bye.